From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
House GOP leaders schedule a vote for later this week to pass their one big beautiful bill, even as members remain divided on key tax and spending issues. What are those dividing lines, and can they be bridged? Here this week to lay it all out is a man who is at the center of many of those negotiations, Texas Congressman Chip Roy. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this week, because I know you are very busy right now.
Kim, I appreciate it. Thanks for what the Wall Street Journal's been doing on this, and happy to join.
So the big news, Donald Trump just met with you guys this morning in the basement of the Capitol. What was his message? What, in your minds, were the takeaway of that discussion?
Look, the president wants to get a deal done. He wants to move it forward. That's very clear. It's been clear, frankly. We've known that. And I think he tried to send a message to the SALT caucus guys that they needed to kind of slow their roll a little bit and back off of their demands for such a high exorbitant cap to continue to do the subsidies for the high tax jurisdictions. But he had a little message to those of us who want to reform Medicaid that, maybe we won't get everything we want out of that either. So we got to keep pushing to kind of see the contours of this over the next 24 hours. We're supposed to go to the Rules Committee in about 15 hours. So we got a lot of work to do today to see where this is going to go.
Yeah, that's right. And I do want to jump into there in a minute on the Medicaid portion of this. But I mean, you and several other members initially protested this bill in the Budget Committee, and then you had negotiations over the weekend. And on Sunday, you felt that there had been enough progress that you could move to the next step on the Rules Committee. What in your mind was the progress, if there was any progress?
Well, look, there was progress. There was definitive progress. Now, whether it was sufficient enough in the grand scheme of things to be determined, and we don't have anything in writing yet, right? We don't have draft language. That's part of the problem with doing this in such a hurry. And I understand the pressure dynamics, but basically the short version is, as you know, Medicaid has a lot of pieces to it. One of which is whether or not we're going to apply Medicaid work requirements. The bill that came out of the committees had work requirements that would begin in 2029. The problem with that, as you know, is that one, we're not sure that would ever happen. And two, it means we're not getting the benefit of that for the first 4 years. So we felt really strongly on bumping that up. We got movement over the weekend. We got general agreement. Of course, nothing's in writing yet, to move that up to by the end of 12/31/26. Now, the reason for that is the time to get the systems in place. Moving it forward 3 years, that was a good thing. We got some waivers that were in place removed. They had some broad discretionary waivers that we thought would mean that they would blow a hole in it. So without getting in the weeds too much, we moved it forward in a way that I think was beneficial. Is that worth a ton of money? It's probably about $100 or $150 billion moved forward. It would flatten the curve a little bit with the deficits that are currently mounting in the first 5 years of this deal. But it was a step. The second thing we got was a strong tightening of the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies that would be paid out over time. We thought that they were too nebulous, and we tightened those down, shortened the window, had a firm construction start date. Those things we think solidify much of the score. They don't add a lot to it. They move some of it forward. That's why there's more left to do on Medicaid with respect to FMAP, all of the things that we've talked about before.
Let's just talk about this broadly for a second. It strikes me that one of the problems here, there's a couple of problems here, but you can say this arguably far more eloquently than I can. If you're just looking at this from 30,000 feet, first of all, we have a federal government that is now spending, 60% more than it did just 5 years ago before COVID. And a lot of that was put in place by the Biden administration. And it seems to me that the real stakes in this bill are we going to use this opportunity to roll some of that back, or are we going to forever live with these now huge budgets and deficits that just grow over the years?
So here's the thing that I think is important in this whole deal. One, we've got significant deficits that are mounting that allow, as you just say, us to be situated right now where we have $7 trillion in total spend versus, I'll go back further, $3.6 trillion or so in total spend a decade ago. So we've almost doubled in a decade. The deficits are mounting. And in this big, beautiful bill proposal, the first 5 years, there's about $1.5 trillion worth of deficits that would be added in the first 5 years on a dynamic basis. You guys, I know at the Journal, and we're all dynamic believers, right? We believe that if you cut taxes and put more money into people's pockets, you get growth. So on a dynamic basis, giving the sort of most benefit to the bill, we believe there's still about $1.5 trillion worth of deficits in the first 5 5 years, then you get the savings in the second 5. So to your point, what that means is we're going to be adding to the deficit and betting on the come that in 5 years we'll get the savings. That never really happens here. So when you pile that on top of the Moody's downgrade, when you pile that on top of the big bank downgrades yesterday or maybe this morning, whatever that was. And look, my first job out of school was as a high yield bond investment banking analyst with what is now Bank of America Securities. And, we used to live and die by those ratings, right? The spread to the Treasury governed what you could go price your bonds. So this matters a lot. Everybody's watching us very closely. I know we can't solve the whole debt crisis in one bill. I'm aware of that, but we need a trajectory shift. And that's why we're so focused on Medicaid, which has gone from $400 billion in 2019 to $600 billion this year to over $1 trillion in 2030 if we don't constrain it. Work requirements are a step, eligibility is a step, but you got to deal with some of those other big drivers. And the last point I'll make is that if we don't get our arms around this, I don't see how on earth we're going to be able to contain inflation. And my biggest fear for Scott Bessent is that we're not going to have interest rates that are affordable for refinancing the debt. And as you know, right, that means a massive uptick. Currently, CBO is assuming 3.5% interest on all of our refinanced debt.
Wow.
We're not even close to that right now.
Right.
So we have got to get that down to keep the interest number down.
Well, let's talk about why the mechanics are what they are in this bill, because I just want to lay this out here. I mean, what you essentially described is a bill where all the kind of goodies, all the yummy stuff that everybody wants to have, and by the way, some of which are incredibly important for the economy, like locking in tax rates. So I don't want to suggest it's pork or anything, but a lot of the things that people want to hear about are front loaded in this bill, and all the sort of savings, et cetera, are backloaded in this bill. And if you listen to those who argue for that kind of mechanism, we hear a lot of things. Well, it'll take a long time for states to get this into practice. And, companies need some sort of wind down time for these subsidies that were all jammed in there in the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, doesn't a lot of this have to do, though, with the fact that people would rather not have to deal with any of these cuts before the next couple of election cycles?
Yeah, no question. And that's a part of it. And look, I'm sympathetic to not wanting to come out of the gate too hard in the next 18 months. I understand politics. I mean, if we want to have a majority, if you're moving the Titanic, we got to have some time to move it. But here's the thing. You just noted a thing about the tax policy. My concern is that the tax policy we're embracing right now isn't the most pro-growth tax policy. Right. Remember with TCJA, the corporate rate reduction was the engine. The other piece that was a really important part, we'll call them the drivetrain, was the expensing and the R&D. The rest of the stuff is all the bells and whistles. It's the freaking air conditioning and the radio and stuff, right? We're talking about child tax credits, which, the
heated seats,
right? The standard deduction that was doubled, the lower marginal rates for the lower brackets. When you pile all that stuff in there, that stuff is not particularly juicing the economy. No tax on tips. That's a little more political than really strongly economic. No tax on auto loans. I don't know. I think that might have a perverse effect. Right. My point is all of that stuff still costs a lot, but it's not creating the growth that the corporate rates did. So I'm concerned that achieving that 2.6% growth, which we assume requires us to definitely get the good tax policy, but a lot of regulatory policy. So we're betting on a lot to get that growth up while we're also still spending at levels that we can't afford. That's the balance that we're trying to deal with, the ratchet.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Texas Congressman Chip Roy. Welcome back to All Things with Kim Strassel. I am here with Chip Roy. We're talking about the Republicans' One Big Beautiful Bill. On Medicaid, you have been making, because, by the way, it's the case to be made. We've been trying to make it, too, at the editorial page, the moral case for why you need to change the current Medicaid structure. And talk about that a little bit in terms of who this program was initially meant to serve and who it's serving now. But also, is that an argument that most of your colleagues understand and are willing to go out and make? Because it seems so important to me that it's the message that comes comes out of any of these reforms.
Well, the good news is they're understanding it now better than they did 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago. Whether it's fully understood or not is still being determined. But here's the short version, right? Is that we have Medicaid that exists, and it was designed for the most vulnerable population, the people who are sick, the people who are the most hurting. And you can debate the merits of how it was functioning and how the best use of money, whether it was efficient, but it was there for a safety net, truly, for those who need it. So then with Obamacare expansion, you started shoving millions of people into the Medicaid rolls who are more able-bodied, who are often single, often male, and they're consuming those resources, and they are putting a lot of those vulnerable folks onto wait lists because they're jamming the system with people who, frankly, should be working. They should have work requirements. They should have insurance or Obamacare premium insurance policies. So that's what we think. We think the moral case is that you shouldn't be doing 7 times as much subsidy for the able-bodied than you do for the vulnerable. We don't think that it is right to do that. So we're trying to pull that back. A lot of interest in doing so, but people are not wrapping their head around how you can do that and actually help people. Let me explain how real quick. I have a bill that would phase out the FMAP and basically drop it down to the traditional population. So you get rid of that 7 times multiple, get it to 1-to-1 over 8 years, hardly draconian.
Right.
You would then drop the 138% poverty level Obamacare number from 138 to 100. So get more of those people into the Obamacare exchanges, which are more affordable than the CBO estimate, $33,000 per person.
Wow.
That they are scoring to keep the able-bodied on the Medicaid expansion. I know that's a lot of numbers for your listeners, but it is immoral. To your point about the moral case. So let's get it right. Let's fix that, save money, help more people. And you've got a message you can go sell to the American people. They're being fiscally responsible, helping more Americans, shrinking the sort of socialized state to put more people into ways where they can go out into the competitive marketplace and get a better product.
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan to me. I mean, there's also the existential issue and case to be made here as well, too, which is that we all well know that the reason that Obama wanted that Medicaid expansion, this is a down payment on government health care for all. And if we just allow it to continue operating on autopilot, you're just going to have more and more populations covered by the government until the private marketplace is crowded out.
100%. And importantly, it was by design, as you just noted.
Right.
And importantly, right now, we believe that if you add the work requirements, which we support, then you're going to tighten the population down of the able-bodied people. And that's a good policy outcome, however, if you still have the 90% match, the $9 for every $1 that you get, the sort of the juice that they give these states that are the expanded population, if you're a non-expansion state like Texas, the ability to hold off the pressure for expanding in Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida,
right,
gets really immense. And frankly, I'd tell you, I don't know that we can hold it off.
Oh, wow.
If you shrink the work population down, and again, that is good policy, but the pressure is going to get lots because they're going to say, okay, we can afford this because we've got a more narrow population, but we want to get that 90% 7-to-1 juicing of the dollars for the expansion population. And then states are going to say, we can't keep saying no. So that's why we want to get in front of that, stop the expansion, reward those 10 states who have held the line, fix Medicaid, help the vulnerable, and then let's then work on our next plan, which should be rapidly expanded health savings accounts with higher caps used for direct primary care, used for insurance products that actually you can get in the market that's a real insurance product, not as regulated, and get the market flowing again so we can drive down prices. Sorry, I'm getting into healthcare reform, but that's where we need to go.
Hey, look, I'm thrilled to hear someone talk about healthcare reform because we do not hear it enough. You know, I lived in the days, I'm old enough to remember Tom Coburn explaining healthcare to everybody, and we need more evangelists explaining this.
Yeah, Dr. Coburn was a good friend and a good man. And when I was on the Senate Judiciary Committee working for Cornyn and then for Cruz, I knew Dr. Coburn well. Yeah,
he's amazing. Let's take one more break. When we come back, more on the GOP reconciliation bill.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Welcome back. You just reminded me of another issue here. I mean, obviously, one of the remaining thorny questions in this is SALT and how we deal with this question of how much people are allowed to deduct their state and local taxes from their federal return. To me, one of the best reforms of TCJA 2017 was capping that deduction, mostly because it was a message to high tax states like New Jersey and New York that you cannot endlessly keep raising your taxes and expect the federal government to subsidize this. There's been a lot of complaints about that. You now have this narrow majority in the House, and the SALT caucus has all said, well, you're going to have to raise that cap. But the demands seem to be never ending. Are we going to get to a resolution here? And I mean, what is enough in the mind of these folks? When do they say, yes, thank you for doubling or tripling or quadrupling our SALT deduction?
So, and I'll let them speak for themselves. I'll let Mike Lawler and Lota and some of the New York guys or California guys who they feel like they're representing their constituencies who have high tax jurisdictions. And they have high home values. There are reasons, and I get it. And they view it through the lens of double taxation. My argument is that, number one, to get TICJA across the line, Kevin Brady needed this as the pay for in order to advance the pro-growth policies and the corporate tax rates, right? We all know that.
Right.
So now you're backing off of that, which puts us in a fiscal hole. So you got to figure out how you can truly pay for it. But number two, on a principle basis, we shouldn't be subsidizing high tax jurisdictions. Right. And I will say that as someone in Texas who says that Texas is sometimes a little bit too much hat and not enough cattle when it comes to what they claim about their tax rates. You've got property tax rates in Texas that really start pushing up. Talk about homes that are not extraordinary in value with property tax rates that go up above the $10,000 cap. So I feel it in Texas. I've got people and supporters who go, well, I could benefit from it. I'm like, well, go to your Texas legislature and tell them to cut property taxes. That's where the pressure needs to lie. Now, look, you want to play a philosophical game. Let's get all principled here. I can tell you, if we restore more power to the states and we had them covering more of the stuff, if we can reform Medicaid and kick more of that back, block grant it to the states, so then they're dealing with their taxes at their end, I might be more sympathetic to the get reduction on the state tax rate.
Absolutely.
Stop being on the federal dole, stop taking massive federal dollars, and then want to game it, put more money in your system, give it to illegals, give it to your expansive programs and funding Planned Parenthood and all these other things, and then come complain to me that you're getting not enough deduction for your largesse in the state when you want to live off the federal largesse. Sorry, rant over.
No, that's a good point. It's a really good point. Look, one of the things, and this gets into a broader philosophical question that I just want to toss around with you a bit. One of the ideas that's now being floated, because you mentioned, well, you got to figure out a way to pay for this. And we've been having this discussion floating around the Republican caucus, which I can't believe my ears at times when I hear, well, one of the solutions is, why don't we raise the top rate? Or why don't we establish a millionaire's tax? How serious is that as a discussion within the party? How widespread is that sort of, I guess I would call it a populist view? It's very worrisome to me. I never thought I'd heard a Republican Party go down that route, especially because it's just so anti-growth. But are we likely to get something like this? And is this a movement that's growing in the GOP?
I doubt we're going to get something like that for the reasons you articulate. And those of us who believe that economic growth stems from leaving dollars in the hands of not just the people broadly, but the entrepreneurs and the job creators. That is the philosophy and the backbone of the Republican Party for the last half century. Okay. And we know that. And by the way, and I grew up during the 80s, learning it, under Reagan, and, Art Laffer's a friend. And I studied the flat tax in the 90s. Like, I'm a low, broad flat tax guy, or even convert to a consumption tax. But those are all conversations we can have separately in a different podcast. But what I would say is this. The reason I even said, look, everything's on the table is because Republicans do need to get religion on the spending side. And for too long, we've had our entire cross-section of the Republican electorate saying, oh, they'll cut the taxes because we do, but they don't care about the spending side. So sometimes, in my view, part of this whole debate here on the reconciliation package was we needed to put a little fear into people that if we're not going to get the spending cuts, if we're not going to reduce the size of government, then I'm sorry, you may not get your tax cut. Because, look, I get donors who will call me and say, Chip, we've got to go give money to Zelensky. Now, we're not here to debate that, right? There are reasons to support Zelensky, push back on Putin, all that stuff. My point was always, guys, that's like $300 billion. So you're all hot to trot on us giving $300 billion to Ukraine. Will you be okay if I raise your top marginal rate from 37 to 39% to pay for it? And I would get crickets from my donor. So that matters to me, right? So Ronald Reagan said an important thing on an interview with Johnny Carson. I remember it well. And he said, hey, Johnny, you know what? I think any program that any politician puts forward should come with a tax attached to it. And I think, Kim, that balance is what people need to feel. You want to come advocate for a fund to get rid of cancer? I'm a cancer survivor, Kim. Then great. Come bring me the $10 billion to pay for it, either through a tax or through another cut. But our guys don't do that. They vote for the tax cuts and they vote for the spending programs. That has to change. So sometimes some of us are going to play a little bit of poker and say, yeah, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now, philosophically, I agree with you. We need rates down. We need economic growth. That's a long answer to your question to say I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But that's the tension, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make total sense. Look, it's kind of a modern twist on you can't have both guns and butter, right? But you have to have some spending discipline. And we've had none. And that's my frustration, too. Everyone's like, well, you can't cut this. And then they go, well, but you can't cut that. And you can't cut this. There's a certain point at which you have to make some priorities. We all have to do it in our private lives. We can't all have what we want all the time.
There's no limiting principle for the federal government, right? Because they just print money. At least in your house, you have to say, well, am I going to take this vacation or am I going to fix up my house? Am I going to buy this car or am I going to fix the well pump or whatever?
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time here and you have bills to go negotiate. But if you had to give us odds right now, when we have this vote later this week, is it going to get across the finish line?
I will know better in about 2 hours. I got to go get a download on some conversations going on right now about where things stand on SALT and Medicaid. Right now, I'm telling you, it's right at 50-50. I think there's still a lot of things we need to go solidify. We had some deep conversations late into last night. I've been here nonstop now, through the weekend, still going, was here until almost midnight last night. I think the Rules Committee meets at 1 a.m. this morning. We owe it to the American people to get this done. We need to work with the president to do it, but it's got to be right. And we've got to get the deficits right, the spending right, the tax right. That's a lot of words to tell you. I think it's 50-50 right now. I might know in a few minutes. It could be 60-40, 70-30 that it's going to get done, but it depends on a little bit of what came out of the meeting with the president that I got to go solidify with some folks.
Okay, well, we wish you all the very best of luck. We wish you that you get some sleep here sometime soon. We want to thank you for coming on this week. We want to thank all of our listeners. If you like the podcast, you can hit the subscribe button. If you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.